The stone pathway leading up to Ohika Castle crunched beneath my heels. It should have felt like a grand entrance, the kind you'd remember in detail later. The golden light cascading across manicured hedges, the string quartet playing something classic but forgettable, the guests in tailored suits and dresses that glinted in the sun like polished shells. Instead, all I could think about was how quiet it was walking in alone. Nobody was waiting to greet me. No one even looked up. My own parents, somewhere inside, had already shifted into their performance mode, charming, warm, polished. I slipped past the valet, gave a faint nod to the floral arch at the entrance, and stepped inside. The scent hit first, roses and gardenias. It was overwhelming in a way only curated perfection can be. The grand foyer buzzed with coordinated energy. Women in heels balanced champagne flutes, and men in cufflinks gestured with familiarity. They were family friends, old colleagues, in-laws of in-laws. I recognized faces, but wasn't sure if anyone still recognized mine. My dress was black, not somber, but sleek. It fit perfectly, understated. Unlike the others, dripping in pastel silk and chiffon, I wore no visible label. Not that it mattered. To them, I was just Marian, the one who helps with logistics. No one asked me to be a bridesmaid. I wasn't surprised. That had been made clear weeks ago. Elowin had told me they were going for a tight-knit aesthetic, whatever that meant. I nodded at the time. I've learned it's easier to nod than to ask questions you already know the answers to. The first person to speak to me was a cousin I hadn't seen since her baby shower 4 years ago. "Wow, Tessa, you look professional," she said, eyes scanning my clutch. "Still doing that shipping thing?" I smiled. "Yeah, still moving boxes around." She laughed, not unkindly, but with the sort of relief people feel when they've safely categorized you. I moved toward the reception hall, scanning for my table assignment. The list was printed on a massive glass panel framed in gold, elegant calligraphy dancing across its surface. My eyes followed the rows. Table 3, Elowin, the bridal party, and their partners. Table 4, our parents, the groom's parents, Elowin's mentor, and a judge from somewhere I'd never heard of. Table 9, me. And there it was, in clean ink. Marian Harlow, Table 9. I followed the signs. The room opened up like a stage set. Chandeliers sparkled overhead. Waiters moved with quiet precision. At the center, a circular table with cascading white orchids and embossed menus. That was Table 1. Table 9 was tucked in the back, near the swinging doors to the kitchen. I sat between a wall and a service cart holding stacked plates and lemon wedges. Every few minutes, a waiter pushed through, brushing past my chair with murmured apologies. The sound of clinking silverware, the smell of seared scallops, the brief gusts of hot kitchen air, they all anchored me to that spot like weights. A woman in a pale green dress took the seat next to me and leaned in. "Oh, are you with the catering staff?" she asked. I stared at her. "No, I'm the bride's sister," she blinked. Oh, I didn't realize. Sorry." I gave her a polite smile and looked away. It wasn't a mistake. That seat assignment, that table, that name on the card, they didn't forget me. They placed me. Weeks earlier, the invitation had arrived in a thick ivory envelope. No return address, just a line in print. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the marriage of Elowin King and Marcus Whitfield." Inside, the RSVP card had my name listed as Marian, family helper. Not Tessa, not sister of the bride, not even Ms. Harlow. Family helper. At first I thought it was a joke, maybe a placeholder. Then I saw the same title again, in the official event itinerary sent by the planner, in the seating chart email, in the thank you notes draft Elowin sent for final review. Every time, Marian, family helper. There's an old saying, call a dog a bad name and hang him. They didn't just misname me, they miscast me, rewrote me into a role I never auditioned for. As the music played and the guests sipped their imported Prosecco, I stared at the flickering votive candles on the table and thought of every other event I had been politely sidelined at. Birthdays, graduations, anniversaries. At some point, I stopped offering to help with planning, not because I didn't care, but because it was assumed I would. When you're competent, people mistake that for obligation. This time, I didn't fight it. I watched. I cataloged. I learned. I wasn't here to argue. I was here to witness. Sometimes keeping quiet is the loudest scream. Across the room, Elowen floated from guest to guest like a pageant winner. Her dress, a couture sheath dripping in hand-sewn crystals, sparkled every time she turned. She hugged with precision, kissed cheeks with flair, tossed practiced laughter into the air like confetti. She was beautiful, polished, admired. A woman leaned toward her, whispering something. Elowen's laughter rang out. "Oh, no. That's just my sister. She's sweet. She helps." They nodded. Not a single person turned toward me. I took a sip of my water. Still, flat, tasted like the silence I'd swallowed for years. In every family, there's a star and a shadow. And sometimes, the shadow knows exactly where the light bulbs are buried. The waiter appeared at my side. Young, nervous, his brow furrowed. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Are you Ms. Jurvetson?" I looked up, curious. "Yes?" He fidgeted with the folder in his hand. There's something I need you to sign." "It's about the catering." My heart ticked once, just a slight shift. "Sign what?" I asked, voice even. He glanced over his shoulder. "The head caterer asked for you specifically." I placed my napkin on the table, stood slowly, and followed him toward the kitchen. The envelope was already sitting inside my mailbox when I got back from a long day at the office. No note, no extra touch of warmth, just a rectangle of cream cardstock with a generic printed label. M. Harlow, in stiff black ink. The kind of mail you'd expect from a hospital bill or a community fundraiser, not from your only sibling's wedding announcement. I stood there in the narrow hallway of my apartment building, the smell of curry from the neighbor's unit lingering in the air, and stared at it like it might change if I looked long enough. Back upstairs, I tossed my keys in the bowl by the door, set the envelope on the kitchen counter, and turned on the kettle. The apartment was quiet, as usual, clean, minimal. Not because I didn't have time for clutter, but because clutter had always felt like a performance of chaos I didn't want to star in. My life, unlike Elowen's, didn't need gilded mirrors or throw pillows in seasonal colors to feel like something. I sat at the table, mug in hand, and finally picked up the envelope again. I don't know why my heart skipped. I wasn't expecting anything personal. Still, some childlike part of me had hoped there'd be a scribbled, "Can't wait to see you there," on the back. There wasn't, just paper. Cold, impersonal, and heavy in all the wrong places. You can't expect people who erase you to suddenly remember how to spell your name. I'd read that line once in a forum for women estranged from their families. I hadn't understood the weight of it until that moment. Inside was the invitation, embossed, elegant, expensive, and there, typed in perfect calligraphy, was the name, Marion, family helper. Not Tessa Jurvetson, not sister of the bride, just that. Marion, the name I hadn't used in business or life for over a decade, and a role I hadn't volunteered for, family helper. I blinked once, twice. I checked the envelope again, then the RSVP card, same line, same title. At first, I thought it had to be a clerical error, maybe the planner copied and pasted from a vendor list, but I'd seen this before. This exact phrase had popped up in previous family emails, in event seating plans, in captions on photos posted to social media, ones I wasn't tagged in. It was never accidental, and in that moment, the insult wasn't in the name. It was in the quiet, collective decision to keep using it. I ran my fingers over the thick paper, felt the indentations in the cursive letters, and remembered a brunch 6 months ago when Elowen had introduced me to Marcus's parents. We were at some vineyard event her fiancé's family had rented for a weekend. Wine flowed, conversations were perfectly staged, and everyone smelled like money and ambition. Elowen, in her soft blush sundress, stood between me and Marcus's mother and said, "This is my sister. She's sort of figuring things out. She does helpful things." There was a pause, a smile. One of those tight-lipped expressions people wear when they don't know whether to be polite or concerned. I had nodded, swallowing the dry laugh rising in my throat. Just floating around logistics, I'd said. The table had chuckled, relieved I hadn't made it awkward. Elowyn had winked at me. That's our Marion. They laughed because they thought I was the punchline. That's what landed the hardest. Back at my kitchen table, I stared at the RSVP card. The checkbox was already taunting me. Accept with pleasure. Decline with regret. I checked the first box, then hesitated at the line for number of guests. I wrote 1. I thought about adding a note, something sharp, something that would cut without drawing too much blood. But I didn't. Instead, I folded the card back into its envelope and placed it next to the sink. The next morning, I called Rachel, my executive assistant, and told her to increase the discretionary fund for the wedding donations. Quietly. Anonymously. Through the Harlow Group's community partnership arm. If they want me to be the help, I told her, let's help them properly. Rachel paused. Tessa, are you sure? I'm sure. Because that was the moment I decided, if they were going to write me into the background, I'd be the one painting the set. I wasn't going to beg for acknowledgement. I wasn't going to correct anyone in public. I was going to make it impossible for them to erase me without erasing everything they were standing on. For years, I'd brushed things off. The wrong name on place cards, being seated near the bathrooms at family functions, getting thanked in the fine print of thank you speeches, if at all. I'd let it slide because I told myself they didn't mean harm. That family had blind spots, but this wasn't blindness. This was erasure by design. My silence, up until now, had been their tool. They'd mistaken my restraint for permission, my absence from the spotlight as lack of merit. It wasn't the seat, it wasn't the dress, it wasn't the speech, it was the name. It always starts with the name. That week, I pinned the invitation to my fridge with a plain magnet, not to remember the date, not to admire the design, but to remind myself that no matter how polished the script, no matter how pretty the font, sometimes the most expensive insult is printed in gold. If names have power, I whispered aloud in that quiet apartment, then mine will be the one they can't ignore much longer. The Vineyard was one of those places you drive up to and immediately feel underdressed, even if you're in designer shoes. Everything about it screamed curated charm, barrel tables, cascading string lights, perfectly arranged flower bundles that probably cost more than my first car. It was Elowyn and Marcus's pre-wedding Blend the Families brunch, an event that sounded sweet in the invitation, but played more like a corporate merger with a buffet. I arrived on time, not too early, not fashionably late, just there. That's what I've been in this family, punctual, reliable, unnoticed. The parking valet didn't even look up when I handed him my keys. I checked my reflection in the car window, black sheath dress, hair pinned up, a string of pearls, not too flashy, not invisible either. The room was already buzzing when I stepped inside. Laughter wrapped around clinking glasses, introductions floated in the air like perfume. I scanned for my parents. Mom was fluttering near the bar with a woman I vaguely recognized from Elowyn's social circle. Dad stood stiffly by the cheese board, nodding as if someone had just handed him a bill he wasn't prepared to pay. "Ah, Tessa," my mother called out in that pitch that sounded warm but wasn't. "Could you do me a favor and help with the place cards? We've had a little mix-up." "Of course you have." I smiled, stepped behind the welcome table, and began sorting the cards. Last names alphabetized, first names lovingly printed in cursive. Elowyn and Marcus had their own font, their own crest. Mine read, Tessa, Logistics. Someone had literally printed that. I slid it back into the box. Guests began filing in, each one dressed like they'd stepped off a Vineyard fashion shoot. The in-laws arrived in a sea of linen and confidence. Elowyn appeared like she was descending from a film set, all flowing blush and forced humility. As I placed the last card down, she approached, Marcus and his parents in tow. "And this," she said, turning toward me with that polished host smile, "is my sister, She's figuring things out right now. Always helpful. Figuring things out. The phrase dropped like ice in my stomach. Marcus's parents smiled with the forced politeness of seasoned professionals. I gave them a practiced nod, every cell in my body stiffening under the weight of those words. Elowen didn't miss a beat. She handles a lot of our background details, keeps things moving. They laughed because they thought I was the punchline, I thought, watching their eyes shift past me to the next conversational target. No one corrected her, not my parents, not me, not anyone. The brunch continued in waves of polite avoidance. Elowen received praise for the vineyard selection, for the floral arrangements, even the custom seasonal menu. She beamed like always. That was her talent, making everything look effortless and letting people believe she did it all herself. A woman with too much perfume leaned across the table and said, "This menu is exquisite. Who came up with the pairings?" Elowen smiled. "I worked with a small team, just made sure everything felt organic and personal." I stared at my plate, remembering the 3 weeks I spent coordinating those very pairings, calling in favors from my contacts in Napa and Sonoma, arranging ethical sourcing from minority-owned farms, working with chefs I'd vetted for years. I had provided it all through Harlow Holdings under a discreet vendor account. "You always did love food," I said lightly, more to my fork than to her. Elowen turned without missing a beat. "Let's not bore them with kitchen logistics." That was it. No thanks, no credit, no acknowledgement. Later that evening, I sat at my desk, the soft hum of my apartment offering more peace than that entire vineyard. I opened my journal and wrote in big letters across the top of the page, "Lines they've crossed." Underneath, I listed the invitation, the place card, figuring things out, taking credit for the menu, the smile she used right before saying it. I paused, pen hovering over the next line. "They're my family," I whispered, "and I didn't want to embarrass them." But the quote I scribbled next came louder in my head. "Sometimes the most painful betrayal comes wrapped in family labels." The next morning, Rachel, my assistant, brought up the event as she reviewed my calendar. "You want me to draft a note? Clarify your role for the thank you list?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "No. There's power in timing. Let's wait." I started copying every wedding-related email into a new folder. Wedding records. Every receipt, every invoice. Screen-capped social posts where Elowen was credited for visionary design. Quietly, methodically, I created a paper trail no one could argue with. "They think I'm passive," I told Rachel. "They forget I own the mirror they're trying to dance in front of." That was the first time in months I felt something other than tired. Not angry, not even vindictive, just aware. At the wedding reception, when I returned to the present moment, I watched Elowen holding court in her white lace masterpiece. Guests hung on her every word. She laughed at stories I'd heard her rehearse, made to sound spontaneous. She's still introducing me as the one figuring things out, I thought, watching her tilt her head for the photographers. That's cute. Let's see how they introduce me when the bill arrives. Laughter rose like mist from the tables, blending with the clink of glasses and the low hum of string instruments tucked into the corner of the ballroom. The reception had reached full swing. Everyone seemed to have found their rhythm. Waiters glided effortlessly between tables, champagne flowed like water, and guests exchanged pleasantries laced with just enough bite to feel exclusive. From the edge of the dance floor, I stood watching it all unfold like a scene I didn't belong to. Elowen was in her element. Her smile glowed, her posture regal, each word from her mouth dripping with ease and control. She had always known how to command a room, how to arrange people like furniture to best complement her presence. She didn't just occupy space, she designed it. Meanwhile, my seat remained exactly where it had been placed, back near the kitchen, close enough to hear the beep of the warming lights and the calls of the sous chef. It wasn't an accident. They hadn't just overlooked me. And they had placed me, intentionally, strategically, so far from the center that no one would have to ask questions about who I was or why I was there alone. And yet, I wasn't completely invisible. No, invisibility implies absence. What they had done was more precise. They had erased me from the narrative, but kept my silhouette. just enough to imply I'd been included. Being underestimated is the best disguise, my former mentor used to say. I used to think she meant it as comfort. Now I understood it as warning. The sound of a spoon tapping against crystal snapped my attention forward. Elowen stood at the center of the room again, microphone in hand. The lights dimmed slightly to frame her in that golden hue she loved so much. Everyone quieted. "I want to thank all of you," she began, her voice practiced and poised. "This day is a dream. Marcus and I are so grateful to be surrounded by those who've shaped us, supported us, and," she paused, letting the moment hang like a well-written line in a script, "even challenged us." A soft ripple of polite laughter filled the room. She scanned the tables, her eyes finding mine. "And even our little family Parasite made it today." A beat. "We love you anyway, Tessa." The laughter this time was louder, more real. A few people turned to glance at me with the same look you give a dog wearing a raincoat, sympathy wrapped in superiority. My smile stayed in place. My hand didn't shake, but the wine glass I held suddenly felt like it weighed more than my dignity. They laughed because they believed her, because they needed someone to laugh at, someone to hold beneath their collective elegance so they could keep feeling tall. And Elowen, she gave them that person freely. Me. I looked away and caught the eye of a waiter carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres. He paused, uncertain whether to offer them to me. Did he think I was one of them? One of the staff? The catering crew dressed better than some guests. But it wasn't the clothes, it was the placement. The vibe. I nodded politely, not taking anything. A few minutes later, the slideshow began. Childhood photos. Elowen in braces, Elowen on stage, Elowen blowing out candles surrounded by friends, most of whom had long vanished. Occasionally, I appeared, usually in the corner, half-turned, smiling awkwardly. Each photo bore a caption: Elowen and her support system. The bride and her family. Not once was I named. Not once was I given my own moment. I was a prop in a timeline I had helped build, then been cropped out of. What they didn't know, couldn't have cared to remember, was that I had provided most of those pictures. I had scanned them, labeled them, sent them over in a neat folder. Elowen had said, "Can you dig up those old albums?" "I want to include everyone." I had believed her, again. "I didn't give you these so you could erase me in high def," I whispered under my breath. A woman at my table leaned over with a syrupy smile. "It's sweet how you showed up." Another chimed in. "You must be so proud of her." I nodded, murmured something bland, and excused myself. The air inside had begun to feel stale, thick with rosewater and pretense. I stepped outside onto the stone terrace. The cold bit at my bare arms, but I welcomed it. It was clean, real. Passive aggression is just cruelty dressed in pearls, I thought. My mother used to say that when her sisters tried to kill each other with compliments. I wasn't going to make a scene. Not yet. That would come later. For now, I needed clarity. Back inside, I returned to my table, pulled out my phone, and opened a folder labeled Wedding Records. In it were PDFs of vendor agreements, payment receipts, wiring confirmations, the caterer, the florals. The lighting design, all handled quietly under Harlow Holdings, all paid for by me. I tapped on the email from my lawyer. Contract processed and signed under Harlow Holdings LLC as authorized. Final balance due at event close. If they wanted me to be the help, fine, but help has its own receipts. They want me quiet, I thought. They forgot silence has teeth. I didn't feel angry. Not anymore. This wasn't about rage, it was about reclamation. I wasn't going to scream, I was going to illuminate. My phone buzzed again. A message from my assistant. "Head caterer is looking for you. Signature needed for final balance release." I stood, smoothed my dress, and began walking back toward the ballroom. Just as I reached the door, a young waiter stepped into my path, nervous, respectful. "Ms. Jurvetson?" I paused. "Yes?" "The head caterer asked if you could come sign off on the final invoice. Or, would you like him to bring it to your table?" I smiled. Calm, cool. No, I said. Let's do it right at the table. When I returned to the ballroom with the waiter by my side, something in the air had shifted. It wasn't the music. It still played softly, the same delicate strings masking tension. But the attention. Heads turned. Conversations dulled. People who hadn't looked at me twice all day were now following my every step. The head caterer met us near the head table, his hands steady, expression unreadable. He nodded respectfully and held out the folder he'd been carrying. I took it in my hands, turning it to face me, and glanced at the total printed in black at the bottom of the last page. $1,028,470. The sound in the room vanished. My eyes didn't leave the number. I looked up slowly, not raising my voice, just letting the silence do the heavy lifting. Seems we crossed the $1,000,000 mark, I said. Good thing the checkbook came dressed appropriately. There was an awkward laugh from somewhere in the back, quickly stifled. The caterer cleared his throat. We just need Mrs. Jurvitson's signature to confirm final disbursement from Harlow Holdings. I heard it land, the gasp that rolled like a ripple from the core of the room outward. Wait, her company? Someone whispered, not even trying to be subtle. I stepped closer to the head table, positioned directly behind Elowen. She was mid-toast, champagne flute poised, the light catching her dress like a mirror she couldn't hide behind. She didn't turn. Couldn't. I signed with deliberate ease, then clicked the pen shut and handed it back. I was told the help should stay quiet, I said, my voice clear. Just doing my job. The murmur spread fast, eyes darted, the facade fractured in real time, and I stood still in the middle of it. 1 week before the wedding, I logged into the shared family wedding expense account and found my access revoked. No warning, no explanation, just gone. I didn't ask, I didn't email, I didn't make a scene. Instead, I picked up the phone, called my lawyer, and rerouted every remaining vendor payment through Harlow Holdings. Quietly, legally. No emotion, just paperwork. They didn't want me to have a voice, I remembered thinking, but they didn't think I'd bring a ledger. Now that ledger had spoken louder than any toast. Elowen's voice broke through the murmurs. Oh, Tess was just helping us coordinate some logistics. She didn't turn. She didn't look at me. She just spoke into the air like I was an employee who had overstepped. I said nothing, because she was doing exactly what I needed her to do, talking herself deeper into the hole. A woman at one of the front tables turned to her partner and asked, not bothering to whisper, "She paid for this whole thing?" Her partner shrugged, eyes on me. My father coughed into his hand. My mother forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Well, she said softly, it's all in the family. Of course it is. Until the family needs credit, or blame, then we all become strangers wearing similar last names. I didn't respond, I just let the tension hang. Sometimes the absence of a reaction is the loudest noise in the room. In the back of my mind, I remembered a voicemail Elowen had left 3 weeks earlier. Her voice, as casual as if she were ordering flowers. Let's just not tell her she's footing most of it. She'll feel included if she doesn't know. I had saved it. Of course I had. I hadn't known exactly why at the time, but now, that choice felt like foresight, not paranoia. I considered playing it right there, holding up my phone and letting her words echo off the ballroom walls. But no, timing isn't just everything, it's the only thing. This moment was enough for now. The cracks were showing, and Elowen's perfect production was buckling under the weight of something she couldn't script. She tried to recover. She raised her glass again, voice strained. To my incredible husband and our amazing families, especially to those who helped make today possible. Another beat. Another pause. I lifted my own glass slowly and stood, just enough to be seen, but not to call for silence. To the bride, I said, voice steady. May she never underestimate the help again. Laughter this time was sharp, uneasy and fragmented, the kind that said everything polite words wouldn't. Elowen's face dropped just slightly, a flicker behind the lashes, and I sat back down, calmly, my work complete for now. This was just the appetizer. After the toast, the room didn't go back to normal. The music continued, Same cheerful chords, same polished musicians, but the mood didn't follow. Conversations restarted, hesitantly, then dipped. People stared just a second too long before pretending they hadn't. Glasses were lifted more out of habit than celebration. That's how I knew the silence had finally spoken louder than the noise ever could. I took my drink and stepped out to the terrace. The air was cooler now. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed hedges. The contrast was jarring. Inside, the walls glowed with curated perfection. Out here, it felt honest, open. I leaned against the stone balustrade and stared out at the garden, hearing only the distant echo of clinking glass and murmured gossip. They weren't uncomfortable because I signed a check. They were uncomfortable because, for the first time, they had no idea who they were really dealing with. She stayed at the head table. Of course she did. Elowen was still smiling, but the corners of her mouth were too tight. Her eyes scanned the room the way a politician scans a press line, searching for weakness, for control. She didn't look for me. I didn't need her to. I didn't hear my father walk up until he cleared his throat, a practiced sound meant to sound casual. "That was generous of you, sweetheart," he said. I turned slowly, met his gaze. I thought it was necessary. My mother appeared beside him, wine in hand, eyes narrowed in that way she reserved for moments when she felt exposed but still hoped to contain it. "You've always been so good at helping from the background," she said with a smile so tight it could snap. Helping. From the background. I took a sip of my drink, let it settle. They didn't see an equal, I thought. They saw a sponsor with no voice. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even move. "Your definition of family seems to end where my checkbook begins," I said evenly. My father shifted his weight. My mother pressed her lips together. Neither spoke. For a moment, we stood in that space between civility and consequence. Then they nodded, tiny movements of defeated grace, and walked away. They'd come not to apologize, but to try and rewrite the moment into something less damning, but the page had already been printed. Later, they'd say they'd always been proud of me, that Elowen was just joking, that I'd taken it too personally. But I'd heard that before. The word joke had become their safety net, a tool for cruelty wrapped in satin. I returned to my seat, opened my phone, and began scrolling through the vendor list. Every name, every receipt. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't argued, but my documents whispered loud enough. "The lighting?" I'd said earlier when someone had commented. "I sourced the design firm." "The wine pairings?" another asked. "A friend of mine owns the vineyard." They didn't know. They weren't supposed to. That was the deal, until Elowen decided my silence meant servitude. "If this is your idea of pride," I'd told my father quietly, "don't bother being proud of me." It was then my cousin Jessica approached me. Her steps were quick, a little uneven, like she wasn't sure if she should be doing this. "Tessa," she said in a low voice, "you might want to check the latest version of Grandma's will." I blinked. "What?" She hesitated, then leaned in. "I overheard your mom last week. She told Elowen she made sure the estate was being transferred to her. Something about fitting the public image better." My chest didn't tighten. My breath didn't catch. I'd stopped being surprised by their choices a long time ago. "She promised it to me," I said, not for Jessica's benefit, but to remind myself I hadn't imagined it. Jessica nodded. "I know. That's why I'm telling you." I thanked her. Measured. Controlled. I didn't confront anyone that night. Not yet. I'm done fighting for spaces I built, but was never meant to occupy, I thought. Alone again, I sat back down and scrolled through photos guests had started tagging on social media. Pictures of the ballroom, the florals, the cake. Every detail polished to perfection. Every inch a reflection of work I'd done behind the curtain. And just like that, I began deleting them. One by one. Not out of rage, not to erase the memory, but to take ownership of what mattered. They don't get to curate my story anymore, I told myself. I'll write it myself. Full access, full name. I opened my notes app and typed a new line. One more scene. Then I walk out. Before I could close the app, my phone buzzed. A message from Rachel, my assistant. "Want me to forward the Elowen audio file now?" I stared at the screen for a beat, thumb hovering. Not yet. We're almost there. As the lights dimmed and the hum of chatter quieted to a reverent hush, I already knew what was coming. Elowen stepped onto the small, elevated stage like she was born there, chin high, dress glistening in the light, and a kind of practiced humility painted across her face. The camera crews shifted, their focus trained on her like it was a live broadcast of a royal address. The screen behind her flickered on. Soft piano music trickled into the room, the kind reserved for car commercials and hospital fundraisers, heart-tugging and hollow. The first photo appeared. Elowen at 3, riding a tricycle in our grandmother's backyard. Then Elowen in elementary school, holding a gold trophy. Elowen with braces, Elowen on prom night, Elowen in every single frame, glowing, framed, canonized. A couple of images showed me, always slightly turned away, or mid-laugh, or helping her with something. And every caption. Elowen and her support system. The bride and her family. Elowen's foundation. Not once was my name spoken. Not once did anyone turn and say, "That's her sister." I was background noise set to music. There was even a photo I remembered vividly. Elowen in 8th grade, holding a science fair ribbon. I was standing beside her, still in my uniform from work, holding the poster board. That project had been mine from start to finish. She hadn't even understood how the pH scale worked. Now, it was recast. Sisterly inspiration leads to early STEM success. My presence was being sanitized, absorbed, repurposed into something that suited her narrative. She hadn't just stolen the photos, she'd rewritten the meaning. She didn't just steal my money, I thought bitterly. She stole my story. The guests clapped between transitions, some dabbing their eyes with napkins. I sat motionless, the weight of my own silence pressing against my ribcage. The screen went dark, applause rose again, and the lights returned. Dinner was being plated when the bridesmaid from earlier, Elowen's college friend with the tight ponytail and louder-than-necessary voice, called out from the head table, "Look at those flowers! Gift from the groom's family! Classy, right?" Heads turned to admire the arrangement, a towering sculpture of seasonal blooms and rare orchids arranged in elegant asymmetry. It was the centerpiece of the sweetheart table, and I recognized every petal. I had commissioned it 3 months ago. A private note to the florist had included Elowen's preferences, the couple's theme colors, and a request for elegance without ostentation. I hadn't asked for credit, but I hadn't expected a full-on identity theft either. I pulled out my phone under the table, found the florist's email, and reread my order confirmation. Then I tucked the phone away and stared at my plate. I wasn't even surprised anymore. I was numb. They're not just taking credit, I realized. They're scrubbing me from the credits entirely. Just then, my phone buzzed again. A message from Rachel. FYI, guests are now tagging Elowen as visionary behind every detail. And another from an old college friend. You're being so graceful. I would have left. I typed back, why leave a show I paid to direct? No meltdown, no explosion, not yet. I watched, and I documented. Every new misattribution was added to a list in my notes app. Every name dropped without mine. Every compliment redirected like a river carved by PR hands. I didn't need revenge. I needed narrative control. Back at my table, I opened my planner app and outlined the next 48 hours. A call with my PR consultant. A drafted post for LinkedIn titled Visibility and Value. It wasn't just about exposure. It was about reclaiming the ground I'd built. Don't interrupt your enemies when they're making a mistake, Napoleon had said. Or someone had, anyway. It stuck. She was writing a fairy tale, but I was the editor. I wasn't going to crash the stage. I was going to redesign it. Quietly, elegantly, like I always had. Dinner ended, and the band began to set up for the dance portion. Guests moved slowly from tables, some heading for the open bar, others for the terrace. I needed a moment away from the noise. As I passed the kitchen entrance, a soft voice called out, "You're Tessa, right?" I stopped. A young catering staffer stepped forward, barely older than 20, nervous but earnest. You helped my mom get a job back in 21. She told me if I ever saw you, I had to say thank you. I blinked, momentarily caught off guard. She said you didn't just write the check. You remembered her name. You asked if she was okay. I smiled. A real one this time. Even in a room full of erasure, someone remembers. The room dimmed just enough to signal final speeches were coming. Waitstaff moved briskly between tables, refilling glasses with champagne and clearing dessert plates with careful precision. Someone dimmed the house lights a second time, and I saw Elowen rise from her chair at the sweetheart table. A spotlight clicked on overhead, chasing her as she stepped forward, clutching a microphone like it was an award she'd already accepted. She smiled. A practiced one, wide but not too wide, vulnerable but still polished. I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight, she began. Her voice was steady, but I caught the tremor behind it. She was holding it together, but barely. This day has been incredible, magical, really. Marcus and I are overwhelmed by the love and generosity in this room. I watched her from my seat, calm, alert, no more adrenaline, just readiness. She still thinks she owns the room, I thought. Let's see how long that lasts. The guests responded exactly as she needed them to, smiling, nodding, sipping their glasses in sync like it had all been choreographed, and maybe it had. Everything else had been. From the back of the room, I could hear quiet murmurs. A few tables were still whispering about the catering invoice. I caught snippets. $1 million? That wasn't a mistake? She signed it? Harlow Holdings. Isn't that hers? Phones were already out, screens glowing like tiny torches in the dark. Somewhere near the middle, a woman whispered too loudly, I thought she was just the sister, an assistant or something. I didn't flinch. This wasn't the time to defend. This was the time to allow truth to arrive in its own volume. That's when I saw Peaches Smith, the wedding planner, approach. She was walking like someone debating every step. She stopped at my table and leaned in, keeping her voice low. I wasn't supposed to give you this, she said. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed over a cream-colored envelope. But they crossed the line. I opened it slowly. Inside was a printed email chain, my name repeated across the headers, and highlighted text in bold. It was a thread between Peaches and Elowen. The most recent message read, Please ensure Marion Harlow is not credited or acknowledged. We want it to feel fully family-funded. I didn't react. I folded it neatly, slid it into my clutch. There it is, I thought. The truth, curated in Helvetica. Elowen was still talking on stage, thanking the vendors, the family, the guests who flew in from abroad. She was preparing to close with something emotional, some line rehearsed for maximum impact. I stood. Excuse me, I said, raising my hand just slightly. People turned. Heads swiveled. Elowen froze mid-sentence. I'd like to offer a quick toast, I continued, calm, polite. The mic was passed to me. I stepped forward, heels echoing on marble, the hush falling like snow. To the couple, I said evenly, may your marriage be more transparent than your event planning. Laughter. The awkward kind, tinged with confusion. Elowen tried to speak, but I held up my hand gently. And while we're raising glasses, I said, reaching into my clutch, a quick note from the archives. I opened the envelope and read, voice steady. Please ensure Marion Harlow is not credited or acknowledged. We want it to feel fully family-funded. Silence. Then, crack. A wine glass somewhere near the middle of the room shattered against the floor. The silence that followed was thicker than the one before. You don't need fireworks to light up a lie, I said, eyes still on Elowen. Just a match and silence. She stared at me. Pale. Still. Words caught somewhere between her throat and her pride. Peaches stepped forward from behind a floral column. Her voice was quiet, but clear. It wasn't a miscommunication, she said simply. That was the moment. The shift. One man at a nearby table pulled out his phone, tapped it. I could see the airdrop icon flash. A young woman, wide-eyed, whispered, "It's already out there." I didn't smile. I didn't cry. "I'm not here for apologies," I said softly. "I'm here to leave the lights on." The room was no longer on her side. The shimmer around her began to dim, not because of the lighting, but because people began to see clearly. A few moved their chairs. Others avoided eye contact. I noticed her bridesmaids exchanging glances, subtle but telling. My mother stared at the ground. My father pressed a napkin to his lips, silent. And Elowen? She just stood there, mic still in hand, unable to close the sentence she'd started 15 minutes ago. I returned to my seat, slow, measured. My phone buzzed in my lap. Rachel. A simple message. Send it? I tapped open the voice file. The one I'd saved weeks ago. I hit forward. The group chat with my family opened at the top of the screen. Message sent. "Don't tell her. Let her pay. She wants to feel useful." I took a sip of my wine. This story isn't over, I thought. But the silence is. This will be a full-length chapter with minimum 1,200 words, following all instructions precisely. Beginning now. Chapter 9. The Fallout. Picking through the wreckage. By the time I re-entered the ballroom, the atmosphere had curdled. The music continued as though nothing had shifted. Light, elegant, meant to float like mist above crystal glasses. But it rang hollow now. The applause had dried up. The grins had grown tight. No one was clapping anymore, not even for show. Guests began slipping away quietly, the way people leave a wake they hadn't really wanted to attend. There were no theatrical goodbyes or emotional farewells, just a series of awkward nods, side glances, and uncomfortable shuffles toward the door. The warmth from earlier, however artificial, was gone, replaced with something colder, sharper. The music was still playing, I thought as I sat back down at my half-cleared table, but the dance was long over. I swirled the remaining wine in my glass, watching it catch the chandelier light in deep red waves. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt tired. Tired in that full-body way that seeps into your bones when you've been carrying more than anyone realized. I looked around. Family members were huddled in tense clusters, whispering urgently to one another. Some avoided eye contact completely. Others gave me tight smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, as if trying to calculate which way the wind was blowing before choosing a side. My father didn't come over. He stood across the room, gesturing toward the wedding planner and the venue manager, performing calm, controlled small talk like it might undo the evening. Damage control. My mother, however, approached with cautious steps. Her wine glass was empty, her voice even softer than usual. "I think things just got out of hand," she said. "Maybe we all misunderstood your role." I looked at her, fully, for the first time in years without softening the edges. "You didn't misunderstand," I said flatly. "You misrepresented." Her eyes flinched, just slightly. Across the room, Elowen lingered near the groom's family. Her back was turned. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the dessert table. Her face had gone pale hours ago and hadn't regained color since. She didn't look my way. She didn't have to. She knew. Someone gently tapped my shoulder, a woman I vaguely recognized from the groom's side. She handed me a napkin, folded neatly into a triangle. Inside, in small handwriting, it read, "You did the right thing. They just weren't ready to hear it." I folded it again and slid it into my purse. No reaction needed. That napkin wasn't for now. It was for someday, when I needed to remind myself I hadn't imagined any of it. Then my phone buzzed. Rachel again, video clips, screenshots, a voice note reaction, trending hashtags. Apparently someone had captured the entire mic drop moment, the read aloud email, the planner's quiet confirmation, the shattered wine glass. Within niche wedding planning circles, it had gone viral in less than 20 minutes. Comments flooded in. "Queen behavior. That's why you never fake the budget." "This is a masterclass in silent revenge." A message from Rachel followed. "We've already had 3 interview requests, NYT Style, The Cut, and a podcast called Corporate Confessionals." I texted back, Decline for now. This wasn't for them. This was for me. And it was. I wasn't angling for a platform. I wasn't searching for fame. I just wanted to take back the narrative that had been spun around me for decades like a silk web. Another email pinged in. From the venue. A standard post-event summary, timeline logs, vendor invoices, final notes. I scrolled to the bottom of the attachment. There it was. Event financial patron, Marion Harlow, Harlow Holdings LLC. No spin, no embellishment, no reinterpretation, just truth. Black ink on white paper. I screenshotted the document, saved it into my archive folder titled Receipts That Matter. Then I printed a hard copy from the mobile printer in my tote bag, something I'd only packed out of habit, not thinking I'd actually use it. I deleted the email after. No one has to clap, I thought, sliding the document into a thin leather portfolio. The truth already stood. The ballroom had thinned out even more. The floral installations were being pulled apart. The band was quietly packing up their instruments. The magic had expired, and only the hired hands remained. I walked past the floral team, carefully snipping stems. I paused to thank the head chef, who was wiping down his station. He looked up, met my eyes, and said with a quiet smile, "I knew it was you." There was no fanfare, just truth. Then I passed her. Elowen stood at the entrance to the lounge, arms folded across her chest, eyes locked on nothing. When our eyes finally met, she didn't speak. She didn't apologize. Her expression was unreadable, not because it was guarded, but because it was hollow. No apology is still an answer. I walked past her, not because I was trying to be dramatic, but because I didn't owe her my time. Outside, the valet helped me into the car. As I closed the door behind me, my phone buzzed again. A message. This time not from Rachel, from Marcus's mother. "I would like to speak with you privately. There's something you should know." I sat there for a moment, phone in my lap, engine humming beneath me. I didn't open the message right away. Instead, I looked out the window at the castle bathed in soft amber lighting, so pretty from a distance, so carefully designed. A perfect illusion. When the lie breaks, I whispered to myself, the cracks spread wider than you think. I woke with surprising clarity that morning. The world outside my window was muted, the early sun casting long, pale stripes across the room in the guest wing of the castle. The grounds felt shrouded in fog, as though the night had breathed secrets into every stone and then moved on, leaving only silence behind. I sat up, slow and deliberate, reacquainting myself with the stillness of reality rather than reaction. Last night's chaos replayed in fragments. Glass smashing, murmurs rising like smoke, the caterer's folder pressed into my hands. But what followed, the hush, the stunned faces, the unspoken shifts in power, had felt more overwhelming than any toast or accusation. In that moment, I understood. Truth doesn't always thunder. Sometimes it lingers like perfume after a storm. I dressed with intention that morning, tailored blouse, sleek trousers, clean lines, not to hide, not to pretend, but to step into the day fully myself. The day wasn't over yet, and neither was the reckoning. An envelope lay on the side table, a formal invitation to brunch from my fiancé's mother, addressed to me in careful handwriting. "Private family clarification gathering," it read. No sugarcoating, just that. When I arrived at the estate for brunch, it was quiet in a focused, calculated way. Only a handful of people had been seated at the long mahogany table. The groom's parents, Elowen, and a few close relatives whose expressions held a mixture of fatigue and obligation. The air was careful, polite, measured, waiting. The groom's mother looked up, and her gaze held the steady stillness of someone resolving to speak long-held truths. "We invited you here," she began, voice gentle, "because what happened yesterday was more than gossip, it was deceit." She paused, then turned to Elowen without another word, the silence serving as punctuation. Elowen's face tightened. She fluttered her lashes like she might blink away regret, but it didn't go away. "You've embarrassed your family and ours," the woman continued, unwavering. "If not for Marion, none of this would have happened." I sat there quietly, absorbing each word. No response needed. The weight of her words landed squarely between us. Elowen's voice came out smooth, fragile. "It was meant to be beautiful," she said. "It was just wedding stress. I didn't mean to orchestrate it so coldly." She placed a gloved hand over her heart, as though that alone might soften the truth. The groom's father, who'd sat quietly until then, added, "Given the level of deception, running the wedding as if it's entirely funded by families without Marion's involvement, we've decided to postpone our foundation's collaboration with your family." Silence followed, and I watched as her carefully maintained composure finally slipped. Her breathing became shallow. She glanced at me, eyes wide but empty. I thought, she built her story on silence, and silence doesn't hold under scrutiny. That afternoon, when I returned to my hotel room, my phone buzzed with a screenshot, the voice message Elowen had recorded weeks ago saying, "Let's not tell her she's paying for it. She'll feel included that way." It had leaked online. A business page with reach across leadership networks captioned it, "Never let the quiet ones fool you." My phone rang next. It was a producer from a prominent women's leadership podcast requesting an interview about my experience and how I handled it. Normally, I would hesitate, but this moment felt different. I thought to myself, I didn't ask for a stage, but I won't waste it either. I didn't celebrate. I reflected. That evening, I sat on the edge of the bed and combed through a stack of emails, speaking invitations, brand features, partnership proposals, all carefully worded, all asking to connect with Marion Harlow as an individual of substance, not just a backstage player. I composed a short reply to my assistant. Let's accept only the ones aligned with the message, truth, not revenge. Because yes, I understood now. Power is best served in silence until it needs to be heard. And when it lands with purpose, it doesn't bruise, it cuts clean. As the sun set behind the city skyline, I packed my bags, preparing to leave. A knock at the door interrupted my quiet resolve. A photographer, discreet, respectful, handed me a small envelope. I opened it. Inside was a black and white candid photo, me as I signed the catering invoice the night before, the reflection of chandeliers in my eyes, the way my lips curved into a slight, knowing smile. On the back, a handwritten note in elegant script. "You looked more like the bride than she ever did. R." I folded it carefully and put it into my tote. In that moment, I realized they built a fairy tale, but I walked out with the truth. I stepped out of the estate with my luggage trailing behind me, its wheels softly thudding against the stone path. No one came to say goodbye. Not my parents, not Elowen, not even a passing glance from any family member. Just the quiet professionalism of the staff holding the door open with the same detached politeness they likely offered every guest. Funny, I thought as I descended the stairs. They had so much to say before I started speaking. The car waiting for me was sleek, silent. I slid into the back seat and gave the driver a nod. The moment the door shut, it felt like insulation, separating me from the residue of everything I'd just left behind. The ride back to the hotel was bathed in golden, late-afternoon light. The road twisted through trees just beginning to blush with autumn, and the silence in the car was soft, not sharp. There was no ringing in my ears, no adrenaline left to spend. Only a new kind of quiet, one that came with the certainty that I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. Back in my suite, I kicked off my shoes and opened the blinds wide. Sunlight filtered in, warming the space where tension had lived for days. I started packing, not chaotically, not to escape, but deliberately. Every folded blouse, every tucked charger, felt like sweeping up old remnants of a storm I'd already weathered. I turned to my phone and scrolled through my voicemails. Familiar names, hopeful tones from weeks ago. Messages I used to replay just to feel connected, just to believe someone in my family might still care enough to check in. One by one, I deleted them. In the drawer was a small, scuffed jewelry box. A high school gift from Elowen, once filled with cubic zirconia earrings and sisterly promises. I held it for a second, then I placed it back in my suitcase, not for nostalgia, but as a symbol of what changed, of what no longer binds. Boundaries aren't revenge, I thought, zipping the last pouch. They're clarity. A ping broke the silence. A notification from Instagram. Someone had tagged me in a comment. I opened it and stared at the post. The young caterer from the wedding, the same one who'd approached me near the kitchen, had posted a photo of his mother holding a staff recognition plaque. "She's the reason my mom got back on her feet," the caption read. "This woman didn't know us, didn't ask for credit, didn't even introduce herself as the one who funded the job program. She just quietly opened a door." Tears burned at the back of my throat, not because I was sad, but because in that one moment I felt seen in a way my family never offered. That moment, I whispered aloud, not the invoice, was the real receipt. Within minutes, I saw the post circulating in quiet ripples through philanthropic networks. People were sharing it not for scandal, but for substance. I checked my phone. Still no texts from my parents, not even a passive-aggressive emoji from Elowen. The group chat, which had once lit up with vacation plans and birthday memes, had gone completely dark since I dropped the voice message. I opened the thread, typed a few words, then deleted them. I wasn't choosing silence out of fear anymore. I was choosing it because it was final. And in that space, I found more peace than I'd ever received from their words. The closure you're waiting for, I reminded myself, is the one you give yourself. I tossed the phone onto the bed, dropped my business card holder into my purse, now noticeably lighter, filled with every contact except those who shared my last name. That night, I booked a spa retreat for the coming weekend. No obligations, no performance, just solitude and rest. A luxury I'd postponed endlessly, always believing I had to prove something first. Now, it felt like a gift I'd earned. I opened my laptop, sent an email to my leadership team at Harlow Holdings, finalizing a mentorship initiative we'd been developing quietly for over a year. The message didn't mention the wedding. It didn't need to. My work would speak for itself, as it always had. I thought back to everything that happened, the speeches, the jokes, the deliberate exclusions, and I smiled. The wedding didn't give me pain. It gave me proof. I wasn't trying to reclaim a seat at their table anymore, because it was never built for me. As I zipped my suitcase shut and slung my purse over my shoulder, a hotel staff member approached with a rectangular box. "Ms. Jurvetson," she said, "this was left at the front desk for you." The package was wrapped in rich, dark leather. Inside was an engraved folio, smooth and dignified, with a handwritten note tucked in the sleeve. "For your next table," the note read, "one you deserve to build and lead. N." I didn't need to read the signature. I knew it came from the groom's mother. A warmth bloomed in my chest, not flashy, not performative, just quiet, steady recognition. Sometimes, I thought as I turned to leave the room, strangers bring the kind of family truth never could. And with that, I walked toward the elevator, the weight on my shoulders finally gone. A week after the wedding, New York City felt unchanged, but I wasn't. The buzz from the weekend had quieted into a low hum, no longer trending, but whispering in small rooms. There were no more flashing notifications or midnight calls. What lingered now wasn't chaos, it was clarity. I hadn't disappeared. I'd redirected. The days since the reception had been filled with reflection, meetings, and surprisingly, silence. Not emptiness, but calm. I found myself waking up earlier, walking without music in my ears, rereading articles I'd bookmarked months ago, preparing. Today, I stood in front of a tall mirror, adjusting my blazer, running my fingers over the monogram on the lapel. HHH, Harlow Holdings. My company. I wasn't attending this leadership roundtable as a tag-along. I was a sponsor. And today, I wouldn't be introduced as Elowen's sister or the quiet one. I'd be introduced as Tessa. The roundtable venue was all glass and steel, suspended over Manhattan like a declaration. Inside, voices echoed across polished floors. Conversations flowed around business strategy, equity initiatives, logistics tech. There was a name tag on the check-in table. Mrs. Harlow, Assistant. I didn't flinch. I picked it up, crossed out the title, and wrote in bold ink, Tessa Jurvetson, CEO. No drama, just correction. Minutes later, one of the organizers approached. Would you be willing to open the discussion today? Topic: Legacy. I nodded, then stood in front of the room and said simply, "Legacy isn't what they remember you for, it's what they can't erase you from." Applause followed. But what stayed with me more was the quiet afterward, the look in the eyes of women who understood every word. At lunch, a colleague leaned over and whispered, "Did you see the article?" She passed me a tablet. An editorial was trending, a full breakdown of the wedding's deception. Vendor statements, screenshots, even unnamed family quotes, a meticulous unweaving of a carefully curated lie. Elowen's image, once flawless, had begun to chip. I closed the tablet gently. "That was never the prize I wanted," I said, "because justice without bitterness, that was the win." My phone buzzed later in the afternoon. A text from my mother. "Family will always be family, no matter how far we drift." I stared at it, then opened a note on my phone, pulled up a quote I'd saved long ago. "You don't owe proximity to those who only showed up to control the narrative." That night, I wrote a letter to Elowen. Not to reconnect, not to reopen wounds, just to close the chapter. I wrote, "You were the star. I was the scaffolding. I forgive you, but I won't seat you at a table you tried to burn." I folded it, slipped it into a drawer, never mailed it. A few days later, Harlow Holdings launched a new initiative, a foundation supporting underrepresented entrepreneurs. Quietly funded, loudly executed. In my debut speech, I told the audience, "Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can say is, 'I built this anyway.'" Standing ovation, not from people who pitied me, but from people who only knew me as a builder. Not the little sister, the CEO, my name, my story, my future, finally mine. That evening, a rooftop dinner wrapped the round table. The skyline glowed. I sat at the head of a long table, not alone, but surrounded by women who weren't interested in optics, just impact. I tapped my glass. "Here's to building what no one thought we could, and sitting wherever the hell we want." Laughter, applause, but no tears. Because the seat they wouldn't give me? I made it the head of the table.